I'm going to welcome our guest this afternoon, Attorney Leo Branton Jr., one of the seminal icons of the Black history community, not only of Los Angeles, but also of the entire nation. So we're going to start a little bit chronologically and go to Pine Bluff, Arkansas. That's where you were born.
Yes, and if we go there to begin with, I hope you'll bring me away from there soon.
Let's talk about that first then.
All right. Pine Bluff, Arkansas is a small town of about 30,000 people when I lived there. The population was approximately 40% black and 60% white. Even though it only had 30,000 people, it was still the third largest city in the state of Arkansas. Arkansas, Pine Bluff was as segregated as most cities in the South. My family was a very well-educated family. My mother was born in 1898. There were 6 siblings. 4 of those 6 were college graduates. And I think that is quite a phenomenon. There were, of course, complete segregation. The black people sat in the balcony of the theaters. We were not allowed to go into the drugstores or eat in the same cafeteria or restaurant as the white people. There were white water fountains with a sign saying white and one saying colored. Also, the railroad station was segregated. They had a colored waiting room and a white waiting room. And when you got on the train, the colored coach for the train was always up front. And the reason for this is because there were coal-burning engines at the time, and the cinders from the engine would come back and come into the non-air-conditioned coach and would hit the Negro people first. I left Pine Bluff under very unhappy circumstances. I had just turned 18. I was a sophomore in college at the Arkansas A&M College for Negroes, now known as the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. I was getting ready to go into my junior year, and my brother and I were in a department store buying clothes to go back to school. My brother tried on a suit, and he asked me, "Leo, how do you like this suit?" And I said, "Well, I don't like it. It's out of style, and besides that, you already have one gray suit." So the clerk said, "What the hell have you got to do with it, nigger?" I said, "Well, he's my brother. I have a right to advise him." And he said, "If you don't shut up, nigger, I'm going to hit you in your mouth." And I said, "No, you won't either." And bam, he hit me in my mouth. I threw my hand into my mouth and saw blood. And unlike Martin Luther King, I was not nonviolent. I hit this guy and knocked him up against the wall. He bounced off the wall. I hit him again and knocked him down. And I got on his stomach and started beating his head from right to left. So they came and got me off of the guy, and he staggered into the back room. And the owner of the store came out and asked me what happened. And I said, "Well, this guy hit me in my mouth, and I hit him back." And he said, "Well, you better get out of the store." And then I heard somebody saying, no, Carl, for God's sake, don't do that." And I looked up, and this guy was coming out of the back with a gun. And when he came around behind a rack of clothing, for me, you know, one of these revolving racks of clothes that you in a department store, when he came around one side of the store, I pushed that rack of clothes over on him, and I hit the side door running. I ran to my dad, whose taxi cab company. My dad owned the taxi cab company there. Well, I was arrested by the sheriff, and my trial was set for 3 days later. And Dad's lawyer, who was Jewish, and we only had one Negro. So the morning of the trial, the lawyer called my dad and said, I can't handle your case. And my dad said, well, why not? He said, it's too much social pressure. My dad said, what do you mean social pressure? He said, well, after all, your son did hit a white man, and that's unheard of, to hit a white man, so I can't represent him. And we said, well, he goes to trial in a couple hours. So I go to court and ask for a continuance, and the judge said, you've had 3 days already, that's enough time. And he forced me to go to trial without an attorney. And I got on the stand, told my story, my brother told his story. The postmaster of the town happened to be in at the time, and he got on the stand and testified that he didn't see what happened from the beginning. He only saw me sitting on the man's stomach, beating him his head from side to side. So the judge found me guilty. I went there charged with disturbing the peace. But when I got there, I was charged with disturbing the peace, assault, aggravated assault, and a whole lot of other offenses. So in the meantime, we had sent for the one Negro lawyer in town. Now the reason we didn't get him in the beginning is because if you came to court there with a Negro lawyer defending you, you'd get 30 extra days just for having a Negro lawyer. So we sent for him as a last resort, and he got there just in time to say, I hereby file a notice of appeal. And in Arkansas at the time, they had what's called a justice court. It's somewhat akin to small claims court here, so if you're convicted, you automatically got a new trial in Superior Court. They put me on bail, and then I went away to college. I went back to Tennessee State, and I had to come back to for the trial later on, my second trial. And this time I had a jury trial, before an all-white jury, with the Negro audience sitting in the balcony and not on the first floor, because the courtroom had a balcony. And I testified as to what happened. And the prosecutor, when I was on the stand, all he asked me was this. He said, where are you now? I said, well, I'm sitting in this chair. He said, don't get smart with me. He said, where were you before you came here to court? I said, I was at my home. You're still being smart with me. Where were you before you came home for this trial? I said, I was away in school. He said, where? I said, Tennessee State College. That's all. In his final argument, he said to the jury, he didn't discuss the cases at all, he said, if this was an ordinary cornfield nigger, I'd tell you just to find this nigger and let him go, because finding him would be punishment for him. But here's a nigger that's got money. Got enough money to go away to college, and in another state. So finding this nigger wouldn't be no punishment. I want to see him spend some time on the county farm. I filed again an appeal to the Supreme Court. After it was all over, when I was back in school in Nashville at Tennessee State, the judge on the case got in touch with my dad and said, I think your son got a raw deal. I think it was a matter of racial prejudice. If you can give me any reason why I should suspend his sentence before it goes up before the Supreme Court, I'll suspend his sentence. So we thought of a reason, and we presented a reason to the court. No need of going into the reason, but it had to do with health, and he suspended the sentence. So I never did have to do the 30 days, and as a matter of fact, that conviction still stands on my record until today. I left Arkansas at the time and never did go back anymore until during the civil rights days.
When you went to Tennessee State, what was your field of study?
I went to Tennessee State with a major in English and a minor in theater arts. I never really wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be an actor. And so I was taking all of these courses, and I traveled with the repertory company from Tennessee State. We were putting on one-act plays throughout the South, like at Talladega and Tuskegee and Dillard, Xavier, Arkansas A&M College, and places like that. So I was really in love with the theater and always saw myself on the silver screen or on the proscenium stage.
And then you went from Tennessee State to where?
I went into the service of this country to save the world for democracy.
All right, now. Everybody in this audience knows that you practice law. We're going to touch on something that I would bet none of them knows, and that is your participation in the 92nd Infantry. What was the 92nd Infantry?
Well, the 92nd Infantry was the only combat infantry in the United States Army with black soldiers. I went to basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri in the engineers. And we had there was a rule that if you had what's called an AGCT score test, which is like an intelligence test, of at least 105, when you finish your course, you would be able to go to Officers Candidate School at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. So when we finished the basic training, 3-month basic training, there were about 12 or 13 of us in my group who had scores high enough to go to Officers Candidate School. So they then said, well, we want to see if you really are Officer Candidate material, so we're going to put you through a prep course. So they then put us through an additional 2-week course. At the end of the 2 weeks, they washed out everybody but 4, and there were only 4 of us left. And then they realized that there were 4 left, so all of a sudden they changed their rules and said, we, Officers Candidate School, now won't accept you unless you're a college graduate. Well, they thought that would get rid of everybody, but what they didn't know was that I had graduated from college when I was only 19 years old, and so I was the only college graduate in the group. And so then they said to me, you have to take another medical examination. So I went over and the doctor examined me, and after the examination he said, well, I'm sorry, Private Branton, but you can't go to Officers Candidate School. I said, why not? He said, well, you have albuminaria. I said, what in the world is albuminaria? He says, your piss is too yellow. I said, what causes that? He said, oh, it's probably due to diet. I said, well, fine, discharge me. He said, oh, no, we can't discharge you. I said, oh, my piss is too yellow to be an officer, but it's not too yellow to be an enlisted man. Is that what you're saying? And he said, well, I'm going to tell you the real truth. The Negro quota has been filled. So I said, how do you think those Negro soldiers who are now giving their life's blood in North Africa, just before we'd invaded, would feel if they knew this was a kind of democracy that they were dying for? And he said, I'll tell you what, there's a new program called Army Specialized Training where we're getting everybody ready for the Army of Occupation. He said, we're sending people back to study languages. Do you have any language ability? I said, not really. I had a couple of years of college French, but that doesn't give me any ability. He said, well, I'll send you to, and you can try it. Maybe you can make it. So they gave me orders to go to University of Wyoming, in Laramie, Wyoming. So I go up to Wyoming, and I'm the only Negro soldier there with about 3,000 white soldiers. And they first gave us an examination in French. And that was a white soldier sitting to my left. And I took the exam, and he was copying off my paper. I didn't mind that, you know. So we both passed the written examination. Then we had to go before a board of 3 Army officers, high-ranking Army officers, and 2 members of the language division at the university. He went before the board first. He came out and he said, Leo, I'm going to Yale to study French. I said, fantastic. So then I went in and saluted and sat down, and the chairman of this board said, I'm sorry, Private Branton, but the language program has now been closed. I said, well, they closed it rather suddenly, sir, in light of the fact that they closed it in between the time that the last man was accepted and the time I walked in here. And he says, well, I'm sorry, it's closed. And so I repeated to him this thing that I had said before, how do you feel that about the fact that Negro soldiers are given their life's blood for this kind of democracy? So he said, well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to recommend you for officers candidate school. I said, pardon my French, sir, but how the fuck do you think I got here? He said, don't use that kind of language. I said, well, I feel like using worse language, Colonel. I said, may I be excused from this meeting? He said, you may be excused. I said, thank you very much. So I left and I went down to Western Union. I sent off 3 telegrams, all saying the same thing. After passing all qualifying examinations for the Army Specialized Training Program in Languages, I have been rejected solely on the basis of the fact that I'm a Negro. I suggest that you investigate this un-American activity. And I sent one to my congressman in Illinois, where I'd been living after I left Chicago. And I sent one to Walter White, who at that time was head of the NAACP. And I sent one to Eleanor Roosevelt. I was there for about a week, and the sergeant came in and said, get your stuff packed, Branton, you're leaving. I said, where am I going? He said, you're going to the University of Iowa to study French. Incidentally, I never knew who got me that entry, but I know who it was. It was Eleanor Roosevelt. Because after I'd been in the program for about a year, I got a letter from Walter White saying that they were investigating it. I never heard from my congressman, but I'm sure that it was Eleanor Roosevelt, because as you know, she's the one who was responsible for the Tuskegee Airmen having come about. So anyhow, I get to the University of Iowa, and I report there, and they said, I'm sorry, Private Branton, but we don't offer French here. We offer German or Russian or Italian, and you can take your choice. So very stupidly, instead of taking the easy language like Italian, I took German. He said, well, you know, we have 5 other Negro soldiers here. We usually we make the soldiers who are studying German all stay together in one frat house, and those studying Russian in another, because we don't want you to speak any English while you're here. We want you to speak nothing but the language you're studying. Well, the Army had taken over all of the fraternity houses at the University of Iowa. I stayed in the SAE house, the Sigma Alpha Epsilon house. And the colonel told me that there are 6 of you, 3 of you are studying Italian and 3 are studying German. But we know that we want to have all you Negro soldiers together, so you all are all in the basement of the Sigma Alpha Epsilon house. So I said, yeah, here I go. I'm going to go down and send another set of telegrams. So I went down to the SAE house and dropped my bag off, meaning to head to the Western Union. And the place that they had us in the basement was the recreation room for the fraternity house. Well, the recreation room was a large room. It had a pool table and a ping pong table, had its own private bath, and the room where we stayed had 3 sets of bunk beds, the rooms before, where other soldiers were staying, were very small rooms with 4 people staying in one room. They all had to share one bathroom that was in the house. So I looked around and I said, damn, segregation isn't so bad after all. So I didn't go send those telegrams. I stayed there about 8 months. Within a month of the time that we would graduate and get commissions, and second lieutenants in the Army of Intelligence. They broke up the program, and by this time, 3 of the Negro soldiers had washed out, and left three of us there. One was studying Italian. He was sent to guard an Italian prisoner of war camp somewhere out west, and the 2 of us were the 2 remaining black people who were just mixed in with the white soldiers, and we were all transferred to the 44th Infantry Division, which was on maneuvers in Louisiana at the time, getting ready to go overseas and go into combat. So the other soldier who was with me, his name was Tanner, a very brilliant young man. He was even younger than I was, but he spoke 4 languages all fluently. He could have been teaching the course. And yet he was a private just like I was in the armed forces. And so we got transferred down to the 44th Infantry Division. Here we are mixed up with these white soldiers. And he came to me and said, Leo, this outfit is getting ready to go into combat. And I haven't had any combat training. He said, I'm going to go in and tell the men I don't belong here. I know that they don't have any Negro soldiers in this outfit. So I said, well, you do what you want to, Tanner. I said, but these are the guys I've been with for most of the time I've been in service. If I'm going to go into combat, I just as soon go with them. So he went over and saluted the commanding officer and said, sir, do you have any Negro soldiers in your outfit? He said, no. He said, well, you've got one now. He said, who? He said, me. And he said, how did you get here? He said, well, I was sent down here with the other soldiers from the 44th Infantry Division. So he then told the first sergeant, transfer that man out of here right away. He didn't even ask him his name. But all Army jackets where you were a Negro soldier had a great big C on the outside of the jacket. C for color. And so the man just started going through, and the first C he ran across, instead of running across this other man, was Branton. So that afternoon, there was an order on the bulletin board, Leo Branton Jr. is hereby transferred immediately forthwith to the 92nd Infantry Division, which was also on maneuvers at the time, getting ready to go into combat. So that's how I joined the Infantry Division, went overseas and was in combat with that division for, I don't know how many months it was, but until about 2 months after the war was over. Fortunately, I got there after I was sent to Italy, incidentally, after studying German. They sent me to Italy. Fortunately, I got there after the troops had invaded by landing at Anzio Beach, which was a terrible slaughter of American soldiers there. But we had already gotten up as far as Naples, Napoli, and I was with the 92nd Division from Naples on up till the time the war was over, where I ended up with a reconnaissance unit near the Swiss border. That's my time in the United States Armed Forces.
Well, what about this movie, St. Anna's? What did you think of that?
That movie was a disgrace. It was demeaning to the 92nd Infantry Division. I think that what's the guy, the producer's name? Spike Lee. Spike Lee should be hung up by his thumbs. He opens this thing with black soldiers marching across the river to take the other side, which was being held by the Germans. And he had these black soldiers walking through, one of them saying, Lordy, Lordy, I ain't got no business out here. Why don't they send the white boys out here to do this? Well, this was disgraceful. This was disgraceful. Sure, Negro soldiers hated being in combat. They didn't like being there because they knew the kind of democracy they were going to die for, and they didn't want to die for that. But yet they still followed the orders and instructions, and they fought bravely all the way, and there was no such thing as this cry out of people acting like Uncle Toms before they were going into combat.
So after you got out of the Army, what did you do?
After I got out of the Army, I went to Chicago, and I still wanted to be an actor. And so I tried out for a play, the only play that was on Broadway at the time involving Negroes was a play called Anna Lucasta. And there was a good friend of mine in Chicago who was understudy, had an understudy role, a woman, in Anna Lucasta, and she said, Leo, there's an opening for an understudy now for Anna Lucasta. Why don't you go try out? So I said, great. So I went and I tried out for the role. And when I finished, the producer said, Mr. Branton, you're an excellent actor. However, we can't use you because you aren't Negroid enough. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, you know, in this play, the role that you would be playing, the man obviously has to be a Negro. He obviously has to be a Negro. But the audience looking at you from the audience, they wouldn't know whether you were a Negro or not. So then the thought occurred to me that, yeah, he's probably right about that. But there's no other role that I can play because the only people who were getting roles at that time were the people like Stephen Fetchit and people who played Amos and Andy Rose and things like that. So I decided, well, I want to be an actor. So what I'll do is I'll go to law school. And I'll become a trial lawyer. Because a trial lawyer is an actor. The only difference is an actor acts on the stage, but a trial lawyer acts in the courtroom. I said, but a trial actor, a real actor, has an easy way to go. He has someone who produces the show for him. He has somebody who has written the script for him. He has somebody who directs him how to do it. But a trial lawyer must do the whole thing. He must produce his defense himself. He must direct himself. He must write think what he's going to do, and then he must perform. And so I said, therefore I can do my acting in a courtroom better than that. And that's how I decided to become a lawyer. I made an application to Northwestern University School of Law, and so I attended Northwestern. I was the only Negro in my class at Northwestern. I decided I didn't want to live in Chicago because I felt the town was too corrupt, and I decided to move to California where the pastures were greener.
What was the legal community like here when you first landed?
Oh, when I first came here, I graduated in 1948, and I came here and took the bar, and I found that there wasn't a single Negro lawyer in the city attorney's office, the district attorney's office, the attorney general's office, one black judge on the bench, no black lawyers in any of the law firms, don't mention being a partner in the law firms, they weren't even employed in a law firm. As a matter of fact, I applied to about 3 or 4 of the big law firms who handle criminal law, because that's what I wanted to do, criminal law. I had read the works of Clarence Darrow and people, Leibowitz and people, the great trial lawyers of my era when I was growing up. And I was impressed by the way they did things, and I wanted to be a criminal trial lawyer. I took a bar review course, the Forest School bar review course, and there were about 1,500 law school students who had taken this review course, and they always graded you at the school, and the big law firms would ask the head of the bar review course to send them a list of the 10 highest students who made the highest grades. Well, I was number 1 in my class, and so I named one in. I went to these law firms, and none of them would hire me. Finally, I went to a law firm, and I don't remember the lawyer's name now. It really is not that important because he wasn't that important. But he hired me. And as I was about to walk out the door, he said, just a minute, let me ask you a question. He said, what is your race? I said, I'm a Negro. He said, oh, not that it would make any difference to me. He said, my clients would never accept a Negro lawyer. Why don't you go down on Central Avenue? There's a lawyer down there by the name of Walter Gordon. And I'm sure that Walter Gordon will give you a job. I said, thank you very much. I left there and I went down to see Walter Gordon. He told me, this other lawyer told me, that that I looked too Negro. And I said, well, now before I wanted to be an actor, they said I wasn't Negroid enough. But let me change for a minute. You know, not looking Negroid enough became great value to me during the civil rights days. I was able to go into courtrooms, into jails, into everywhere, stay in the hotels, eat at the restaurants throughout the South because nobody suspected that I was a Negro. It's the greatest insult in the world for a white man to make a mistake and call a white man a Negro. And so I knew that nobody would dare question me because he would think it would be an insult. So that stood me in good stead during the civil rights days.
At some point, you ran into the Bucky Walker case. What was that?
Well, I had been practicing law for about 6 months, and I read in the newspaper about a young air corpsman who was arrested in Riverside County for a double murder. And there was something in the paper, it was headline news all in Los Angeles. And all of the 3 Los Angeles Times, Los Angeles papers, we had 3 then. We had the Mirror, we had the Herald Examiner, and we had the Times. And it was all of the newspapers. So I became convinced that this kid was not guilty, and I said, I'm going to go over and offer to represent him in this case. Well, I got to tell you, I also had an ulterior motive in doing that. And in addition to wanting to help him, I knew that this was going to be headline stuff, and nobody knew who I was in Los Angeles, but my name would be all over the front pages if I took this case. And so that was a plus that I got out of the case. So I went over there and I found out that never in history had there been a Negro person sitting on the jury in Riverside County. And so the first thing I did was make a motion to quash the jury panel on the grounds of systematic exclusion of Negroes from the jury. And I did that because the Supreme Court had declared it unconstitutional to have a discrimination against race in the Scottsboro case, which took place in the 30s. So I made this motion to quash the jury panel. But then 2 things came to me after I made the motion. All of a sudden I said, you know, this is a death penalty case. What the hell am I doing over here by myself, representing a guy in a death penalty case, and I've been practicing law for about six months. So I went to all of the Negro lawyers in town and tried to get them to join me in this case. I don't know whether I went to Walter Gordon or not, but if I had gone to him, he would have turned me down, only because he couldn't afford to be over there for a 3-month trial because he had too much going on here. But all the Negro lawyers turned it down, and I had to go by myself until finally the NAACP decided they wanted to come into the case, so they sent every reporter over to sit during the trial. He took no part in it, came over. Now, my other problem is, how do I show that there had never been a Negro to sit on a jury? Because they didn't keep any records on what kind of race, showing the race. And I looked at all the jury. But I asked a few questions around, and everybody told me they had never seen a Negro on a jury. So then what I did is something that perhaps only a young lawyer who would hit a white man in Arkansas would have nerve enough to do this. I served a subpoena on every Superior Court judge in Riverside County, and a subpoena on all of their clerks. And I started calling them to the stand. Have you ever seen a Negro on a jury? No. Have you ever seen a Negro on a jury? No. So after a full day, the judge said, I'm convinced this jury panel is quashed, and the jury commissioner is instructed to bring in a jury with a representative number of Negroes on it. And so for the first time in history, as a result of the Lawrence Bucky Walker case, lawyered by Leo Branton, Riverside County had an integrated jury.
The Smith Act, what was that?
The Smith Act. The Smith Act was a congressional, rather a federal law that made it unlawful for people to conspire to overthrow the government. And at this time, we were at the height of McCarthyism. Everybody hated the communists. And they put on trial the leaders of the Communist Party in New York and went through a long trial, and all of the defendants were convicted for conspiracy to advocate the violent overthrow of the government, and they all got 5 years, which was the maximum by law at the time. And even all of the lawyers went to jail. Now one will wonder, well, how could the lawyers go to jail? Well, the judge in that case was a tyrant. And he, at the slightest wrong move from a lawyer, would hold him in contempt of court. So all of the lawyers were held in contempt of court, and they all got jail time for being held in contempt of court. There was one black lawyer on that team, followed by the name of George Crockett, out of Detroit. I got to know George quite well. George was a member of an integrated law firm in Detroit. He, in spite of the fact that he went to jail as a result of his services in the Smith Act, he later became a judge of the court in Superior Court in Detroit, and after that he became a United States Congressman. So then, flush off their victories in New York, the government decided to go after the Los Angeles, California Communist Party leaders. So they indicted 13 members of the Communist Party in California and charged them with conspiracy to advocate the violent overthrow of the government. Well, the lawyer for the Communist Party at that time was a lawyer by the name of Ben Margolis. And so Ben needed somebody to help him with the case because there were 13 defendants, and he wanted to have at least 3 or 4 other lawyers to help him. So he went to every member of the criminal courts bar in Los Angeles, and all of them turned him down, saying, no, I'm not going to represent a communist. I'll lose my other clients for representing a communist. And all the lawyers in that case went to jail. I'm not going to go to jail for any communist or anybody else. So finally someone told him that there's a young lawyer who just tried the Lawrence Bucky Walker case in Riverside County. And he's a fantastic trial lawyer. Why don't you go to see him? So they came to me and he asked me, would you mind representing members of the Communist Party? I said, if they pay me, of course I will. So I joined that team of lawyers. We tried the case, and incidentally, he finally put together a team, but Al Weirin, who was the attorney for the ACLU, had nerve enough to join. A fellow whose name I can't recall right now, but who was head of the AFL-CIO union, he joined. A fellow who represented the Harry Bridges Longshoremen's Union up in San Francisco joined, and then it was Ben Margolis, and there was Leo Branton. We tried that case. All of the defendants were convicted. We had one lady who took the witness stand to testify for the defense, and she testified on direct examination all about her things that she had done as a communist and what she believed in as far as communism was concerned, that they did not believe in force and violence. The theory of the government was that the revolution in the Soviet Union, in Russia I should say, came about through force and violence, through the teachings of Marx and Lenin, and therefore any communist in the United States was bound to try to bring about an overthrow of this government by force and violence. Ridiculous theory, but that was their theory. She told all about what she did as a member of the Communist Party, what work that they were involved in. On cross-examination, all the United States Attorney did was ask her, is so-and-so a member of the Communist Party? She said, I will answer any questions about myself or any of my defendants who are on trial, but I'm not going to name anybody else as a communist, because I know it'll mean they're going to lose their jobs, or they're going to be harassed, suffer other things as a result of being named as a communist. So the judge told her to answer. She wouldn't answer. They held her in contempt of court. Then they asked her about 30 or 40 more names of people, and she refused to answer, and every time she refused to answer, the judge would hold her in contempt, and she got something like, she was required to stay in jail for the rest of the trial. So because she was being held in jail for the rest of the trial and everybody else was on bail, the defense decided they wouldn't call any more witnesses to testify, so we rested after she was put in jail. She stayed in jail for the rest of the trial. They were all convicted, and the case was appealed to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. They upheld the conviction, and then it was also appealed to the United States Supreme Court. At the same time, the contempt citations against this lady, month after month after month, year after year after year, for all these various contempts, her case was appealed also on these contempts. So I wrote a brief in connection with my clients, and I also wrote a brief in connection with the contempt citations that were issued against Olita Yates, who was the person who refused to name names, and both appeals went to the United States Supreme Court at the same time. The United States Supreme Court reversed the main conviction, and reversed it on the grounds that these communists were only espousing their views under the First Amendment, and that there was no evidence or no clear and present dangers that they were about to overthrow the government. Under the First Amendment, they had a right to do these things. And while the law is still on the books, I suppose, no one has ever been prosecuted under that law since then. Well, I argued the contempt case before the court. I did not argue the main case because the judge would only allow 2 lawyers to argue, and Ben Margolis was one, and a fellow by the name of Robert Kinney, who was an ex-Attorney General of California. We got him to argue the case, even though he wasn't in the trial. And our purpose of getting him to argue, he was Attorney General under Earl Warren. And Earl Warren is now the Chief Judge of the Supreme Court. So when Bob Kinney came in, he rose and he said, "May it please the court?" And Earl Warren said, "Yes, Judge Kinney." And so we figured we had a little step ahead by then. So we went back to the trial court. The trial court says, "I don't know what the Supreme Court means. I gave what I thought was a fair sentence in the first place." So he sentenced her to the same sentence that he did before. I then filed a petition for the Supreme Court again to go back. The Supreme Court then, without hearing from the government, ruled that our petition for certiorari was granted, and the case is ordered dismissed. And so so that was my first case in which I fought to uphold the First Amendment.
Let's talk about the FBI. What can you tell them about how you were treated and the ultimate outcome?
Well, the FBI has never been one of my favorite organizations. I figured that the FBI must have some kind of file on me because I had represented so many unpopular causes. I had represented Communist Party people. I had represented witnesses before the Un-American Activities Committee. I had represented the Black Panther Party. I had represented the Black Muslims. I had represented Angela Davis, who was an admitted member of the Communist Party. And I said, they must have a file on me. So I asked for my FBI file, and it was shocking when I got the file. The FBI first picked me up on their radar when I made a speech about a year after I was in practice here, at a meeting that was protesting the coming execution of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. Most of you people here are too young to remember the Ethel and Julius Rosenberg case, but it was a case where they were charged with the conspiracy and they got the death penalty the first time they were going to execute people in peacetime. And I made a speech opposing that. That was the first thing in their report. The next thing in their report about me was I again spoke at a meeting protesting the denial of a passport to Paul Robeson. The government at that time, again, most of you people in here are too young to know about Paul Robeson, unless you studied about him, but Paul Robeson was the first great civil rights fighter of our time. And the government had had taken away his passport because they was afraid that when he went to a foreign country, he would say something that was detrimental to the interests of the United States. So they took it away, and that was a fight to gain it back. I spoke on that, and they did take it back. There was an effort at one time, which was incidentally, at one time I was almost under constant surveillance by the FBI, because there were reports saying Branton still keeps his office at such and such an address. We know this from information received from reliable informants, and our agents have seen him going in and out of the office. Time that I thought that they did something which they really were trying to get Leo Branton was, there was a report in there from the desk of J. Edgar Hoover to all agents in the Los Angeles area and in France. We have it on reliable information that Leo Branton is going to Paris on TW flight number so-and-so on such and such a date to visit his client Dorothy Dandridge, who's doing a movie in the French Riviera. It is thought that he might visit some of his wartime haunts in Italy while he's there. Please report to me any unusual circumstances or occurrences that take place while Branton is away. And then at the same time, there was a report saying Branton applied for a passport, and in the passport he stated that his marital status was married. We have searched the records of Los Angeles County, and we can find no evidence of a marriage license ever been issued. We have searched the records of Little Rock, Arkansas, and Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and we find there's no record of ever been issued. So therefore, we must assume, because he is living openly with his wife and 3 children, we must assume that he is married. Now, the reason this is significant is because most people don't realize it, but it's a felony to give a false statement to a governmental agency. And when I told them I was married, and if I had not been married, that would have been grounds for them to bring charges against me for making false statements to the government. But they never thought about going to Las Vegas. That's where I got married.
The last thing I want to ask, I want to take you back to Pine Bluff, Arkansas. You and your brother Wiley, who was also an attorney and also has his history with the civil rights movement, went back there to handle a case, right?
Yes.
And after the case was, who was the judge on that case?
Well, my brother Wiley, who was doing civil rights work all over the South, who was the second black graduate from the University of Arkansas Law School, called me and said, Leo, I'm going to try a case, civil rights case in Pine Bluff. Why don't you come back and help me try the case? So I did. I went back to have him try the case. And we went in, and he said, let me go back in chambers and ask the judge to allow you to appear on this case, because I had no license to practice in Arkansas. But a lawyer can go to any state and he can be permitted to practice for 1 or 2 cases, but not to have a practice. So he took me back in the chambers, and lo and behold, the prosecutor who had made these statements in courtroom about me and having enough money to go away to college is now the judge. And my my brother walks in, he says, Judge so you remember my brother Leo? He says, oh yes, I remember your brother. And so he said, welcome to, he said, your petition for Mr. Branton, and he called me Mr. incidentally, is granted. So I said, Your Honor, I want to make a motion. He said, what motion do you want to make? I said, I want to make a motion to quash this jury panel on the jury panel was integrated by then, to quash this jury panel on the grounds of systematic inclusion of Negroes. So he said, what are you talking about? You Negroes for years have been talking about systematic exclusion. We put Negroes on there. Now you want to have systematic inclusion? What do you mean? I said, just what it says, Your Honor. You include just enough Negroes who it looks like Negroes are going to be on the jury, but they're always just enough so you can use all your challenges and get rid of them, so you end up with an all-white jury as it is. So he denied my motion. We went out and tried the case, it was a very difficult case for us to try, but what happened, because the defendant had been accused of knifing a young white fella who had tried to stop he and his daughter from going to an integrated school, and he had cut him, and he was charged with attempted murder. But the jury hung 10-2 for acquittal. And after the verdict was over, which was quite a victory, we walked down on, and the courthouse was up like the Supreme Court. There were steps leading up to it. My brother and I were down there on the steps talking to all these people that come around for hundreds of miles around, because they all knew about what had happened to me when I was there. And they said, you know, Leo Branton is back in town. And he and that young Branton are going to try this case. So during the course of the trial, whenever we'd make a point, the people who were sitting there, now the audience is integrated. They say, yes, praise the Lord. And the judge had to warn them 2 or 3 times to be quiet, you know, but they were so thrilled. And then after it was all over, they were coming up and hugging us and embracing us and everything. And then all of a sudden the crowd got quiet. And I looked up, and the people were partying, like the party of the sea, and the judge is walking down. He walks down, he holds out his hand and says, Leo, come back to my court anytime. He shook my hand, and he said, I have dismissed the case. He dismissed the case, and they didn't have a second trial.